Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is my favourite novel of all time. I have said that many times on this channel. This gorgeous hardcover copy, which was the first copy of Frankenstein I ever read, permanently sits behind me on this set. I have a tattoo of Frankenstein's monster on my arm. Thank you so much to Matt Daniels for that, by the way. And I named my cat after Mary Shelley's mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. Frankenstein means a lot to me, and it means a lot to many people, including all of the authors I'm going to talk about here. Here are 6 novels, 5 of which were written in the last few years, all inspired by Frankenstein, all perfect novels for fans of Frankenstein like myself. If Mary Shelley's masterpiece means as much to you as it does to me, you need these books in your life. Let's start with the newest of the bunch, the book that inspired this whole video, A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. A Botanical Daughter is a contemporary gothic horror novel that on paper, and it turns out in reality once you read it, is perfect for me and anyone like me who adores the gothic genre, adores horror, celebrates queer fiction, and has an obsession with Frankenstein. Those all seem like really specific things that might not necessarily overlap, but you'd be surprised. A Botanical Daughter is set in the late Victorian period. Its protagonists are 2 men named Gregor and Simon. They live together in a botanical garden atop a hill in Buckinghamshire. Gregor is an accomplished botanist, and Simon is a taxidermist. Simon spends plenty of his time working on projects in the basement while Gregor tends to all of the plants and flowers. These 2 men are in love, and so they live a very unconventional and relatively secretive life, just as so many queer couples in Victorian England had to do. But one day, Gregor receives a package all the way from Indonesia, and inside this huge crate is a mycelium, a collection of fungal tendrils, a thing that writhes and seems to be alive. In the center of the crate is a flower that this fungus is keeping alive, helping it thrive. And the mycelium seems to be reactive, seems to be almost intelligent, and Gregor wonders what this thing is capable of. He has the wonderfully abstract and ridiculous idea of somehow having this thing infect a human body, but not a live one. That, of course, wouldn't work. Maybe a freshly dead one. Maybe if he could find a nicely undecomposed corpse. His partner Simon, with all of his taxidermy skills, could help Gregor stitch this mycelium into the body of a human, give it a vessel to control, animate it, and see what kind of creature, what kind of monster, what kind of daughter might be born for them. This is a queer story about a couple who start a family in the most strange and unconventional way possible. This novel is dark, it is strange, it is funny. Our characters are wonderfully unlikable in a truly gothic sense. They are hilariously crass towards each other. Both of them are very arrogant, have very twisted morals. You will laugh along until you don't anymore. The first half of this book is full of moments of humor, levity, until everything gets way too dark, way too twisted and scary and strange, and the humor has to break. I loved every single thing about this book. Its characters, its setting, its tone, its pacing, its queer family themes, its Frankenstein inspiration, everything. This is perfect. A Botanical Daughter is perfect. A fairly obvious choice is Poor Things by Alasdair Gray, a novel that a lot of people are discovering right now thanks to Yorgos Lanthimos' incredible film adaptation, which I've talked about more than once on this channel. I love that film to pieces. I did a full review of it and the novel paired into one video. I read the book, I went to see the film, and I have fallen in love with both. And this novel is undeniably very much inspired by Frankenstein. Unlike the film, however, the novel is framed in an interesting way. It is presented to us as a manuscript that Alasdair Gray claims to have found. That manuscript is supposed to be the true story of the true life of protagonist Max McCandless, a Victorian man who fell in love with a girl. Most of the novel is told from McCandless's perspective, and it is all about Bella Baxter. Bella was once a woman with a different name, who jumped from a bridge in an attempt to take her own life. When she did so, she was pregnant, and her body was found by a man named Godwin. Godwin couldn't save the mind of this woman, but he could save the mind of the child in her belly. And so he takes the brain from the baby and puts it in the skull of the mother. And so we have a Frankenstein's monster type woman with the mind of a child, whose mind is developing way faster than your average brain. And Max McCandless, upon meeting this adult woman with the brain of an infant, starts to fall in love with her very, very quickly. It is a twisted Lolita-esque story that soon gives way to obvious themes of socialism, and not just women's autonomy, but women's freedom and hedonism. As Bella grows and changes, breaks free, travels, discovers the wonders of love and sex and learning and experiences and everything else that life can provide. It's a really weird, twisted, hilarious, dark thing. Poor Things is wonderful. The film upset a lot of people, and I am all here for that. But if, like me, you adored the film, you understood what it was doing and just how wonderfully clever and brilliantly daring and transgressive it is, and you haven't read the novel, please do. If you love Frankenstein, this is a politically charged feminist Frankenstein for our age. And it's also set in Glasgow, where I live. Alistair Gray was a proud socialist feminist Glaswegian man, and the heart and soul of this novel is here in Glasgow. Check it out. Mary, or The Birth of Frankenstein by Dutch author Anne Eickhout was my favourite novel of last year. This book was translated from Dutch into English by Laura Watkinson, and I was absolutely floored by it. Anne Eickhout is an incredible writer, and more people need to be reading this book. Mary, or The Birth of Frankenstein is an historical novel about Mary Shelley's youth. It is divided into two different summers during Mary Shelley's teen years. One summer is the time that everyone knows, the time that she spent a few months sitting on the banks of Lake Geneva, resting in a cabin with her new husband, the poet Percy Shelley, the hedonistic Lord Byron, and a few other friends and family. During that time, as many people know, they dared each other to write and tell ghost stories, and what Mary told would become Frankenstein. But there is so much more to that summer that people don't know, that people don't talk about, and a lot of it is explored in this novel. Most prominently, the fact that Mary, at the age of 18, lost a child and now fears that her son William could die too. She understands mortality. She has suffered the loss of one child and worries every moment of every day that something will happen to the other. And it's that loss that inspires Frankenstein, as well as a few other, arguably just as dark things. But the other summer is one from a few years earlier, where Mary is about 14 years old. She spends a summer up here in Scotland with a family friend. She is ill. Her father is worried about her health, her mind, and so he sends her up to take in the air. But while she's here, she starts playing with a local girl. She and this girl become fast friends. Strange things happen to them when they go on their adventures. Their imaginations take over, and the two of them start to fall in love. This is a novel about the bisexuality of Mary Shelley. Like so many Gothic stories, it leans into queerness, just like A Botanical Daughter. Frankenstein is not an explicitly queer story, but it is a story that so many queer people attach ourselves to. Frankenstein is something we all can relate to and understand on a very deeply thematic level, and that's why so many stories inspired by Frankenstein are often queer, including this one. I love this book very, very dearly. When I first read and made a video about Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz, I summed it up by saying, what if Frankenstein was a romance? This novel is set in the Edinburgh of 1817. There's a lot of Scotland on this list. Good for Scotland. In the world of this novel, a plague has just ravaged the city. A plague that didn't actually ever exist. But in the novel, the plague took our protagonist's brother. Our protagonist is Hazel, and her mother is beset by grief. She is all but useless. She cannot do anything. She can no longer function after the loss of her son. And much like Victor Frankenstein, Hazel is inspired by the loss of her brother to better understand illness and death and maybe conquer it. Now, Victor Frankenstein dug up a bunch of body parts, stitched them together, and made a new person in an attempt to defy God and death. Anatomy takes a similar approach, but certainly not the same one. Hazel wants to be a doctor, At this time, women cannot be doctors, and even though Hazel is rich and powerful, her family are lords of this land, that doesn't make a difference. She tries to sneak into lectures as a boy wearing her dead brother's clothes. Doesn't work. She gets found out, but she is challenged by one of these professors to become as good a doctor as she can be through her own research and practice. She takes him up on that challenge. Lucky for her, she has a disused basement in her castle, because sure, this is a gothic story. And in that basement, she will conduct experiments to make her a better doctor. But to do so, she'll need the help of a resurrection man, a man who digs up graves and extracts bodies to sell to science or other people. That resurrection man is Jack. Jack and Hazel are going to fall in love. This is a love story. Jack digs up the bodies and he gives them to Hazel for her to work on and study. And I won't tell you any more because there are plenty of twists and turns to this novel. This is certainly a piece of YA fiction. It's a little less thematically deep, a little less dark and twisted than the others I've mentioned here. And so if you want a Frankenstein-inspired story that is certainly still gothic and it's great historical fiction, but it's just a little bit lighter and a little bit more romantic, this is what you're looking for. Orpheus Builds a Girl by Heather Parry is one of the best novels written in the past few years. Plain and simple. This is a true masterpiece of the Gothic. Fans of Frankenstein need this novel in their lives. I cannot stress that enough. After this book came out, I did a review. I went to an event in London where Heather was interviewed by Julia Armfield. I interviewed Heather on this channel, and just before moving up here to Glasgow, where Heather also lives, I actually messaged her to ask for her advice about what neighbourhoods I should settle in. Heather's amazing. I love her to pieces, and this novel is a gift. Orpheus Builds a Girl is inspired by a true story. It is set in the mid-20th century after World War II, and our protagonists are a German doctor who moves to Florida and the daughters of a Cuban family who also move to Florida. Much like how Frankenstein is brilliantly framed as a series of letters and diaries and stories told from one person to another, Orpheus Builds a Girl is set up as a memoir written by and about this German doctor. But the copy that we have has been annotated and interrupted by one of these Cuban women in order to set the story straight. Gabriella explains in the introduction that Wilhelm von Thor wrote this memoir about his life as a doctor, as an immigrant, and his love affair with this Cuban girl called Lucy. But Lucy was Gabriella's sister, and Gabriella knows the truth of this love affair, and she's going to tell it in the margins, in between the chapters. She's going to break through his patriarchal, masculine lies, his twisted truth. She's going to have her voice heard, and the voice of her lost sister Lucy, even if it's from the margins, from the edges, from the void in between the pages and the words. Wilhelm von Thor is our Victor Frankenstein, but here this is a feminist tale about a man who did terrible, awful things to a girl and framed it as romantic, framed it as a desperate, tragic love story. And Gabriella is going to tell us the truth. I love this book more than I can put into words. Heather's writing of these characters, her use of very flamboyant, gothic, beautiful language. It's all so Frankenstein, but it is so much about patriarchy and the relationship between men and women's bodies and women's autonomy and women's voices. I love this book. In fact, if you read just one of these 6 books, let it be this. And finally, we have Our Hideous Progeny by C.E. McGill. This is arguably the most daring book on this list because it is effectively a sequel to Frankenstein. Finding the courage to write a sequel to Mary Shelley's masterpiece is impressive in and of itself, and Our Hideous Progeny is excellent. The book is set in the 1850s, and our protagonist is a woman called Mary. She and her husband Henry work in science. He is a budding geologist, and they want to make their name in the world of science. Early on in the novel, Mary learns that she is the great niece of Victor Frankenstein, a man who vanished one day in the Arctic Circle. And the papers and diaries and research of his that she finds may help her and her husband make a name for themselves in the world of science, geology, discovery, etc. This was the time when dinosaurs were being discovered and talked about. It's a hard moment for us to imagine. As a kid, I was obsessed with with dinosaurs, and even though I know this isn't true, in my mind we've always just known about them. Dinosaur skeletons have always been there, and so throughout human history we've always known about dinosaurs, right? No, they were being discovered and named and put on display in museums during the Victorian period. This was a very exciting moment of discovery and exploration, and Mary wants to be a part of it. With Frankenstein's knowledge and information, they go up to Scotland, Henry's home. There they will spend time with Henry's sister, and she and Mary will bond. See, Henry is also a gambling addict, and their relationship is on the rocks as a result. But Henry's sister is right there. Once again, we have a Scottish story from a Scottish writer that is also wonderfully queer. I feel like so many of the books on this list are proof that you cannot untie the queerness from Frankenstein. It inspires so many great queer writers to write wonderfully queer stories in the vein of Frankenstein, to even write a sequel to Frankenstein that is both queer and about dinosaurs. Hey, did you like Frankenstein? Do you like dinosaurs? How about we just smack those two together? This book is so much fun. In fact, I think I'm ready to reread it. It's great. I really hope you enjoyed this stack of 6 books inspired by Frankenstein that any Frankenstein fan needs to read right now. Once again, if you only pick one, let it be Orpheus Builds a Girl. That novel is a true masterpiece, but every single one of these books is really, really excellent. Enjoy, support me on Patreon if you're able to, and subscribe for books.